Atari 8-bit Datamost game exploration. 15 plus classic 8-bit games. Datamost was a Southern California-based game and book publisher for American 8-bit computers in the early 80s. They produced roughly 40 games across Apple, Atari, IBM PC, and Commodore machines, 16 of which we will explore here for the Atari 8-bit. They mostly released arcade and action titles, some unique to the Atari machines and some ports from the Apple II. To paraphrase a 2017 K-Savitz interview with Gary Koffler, the VP of A&R at Datamost, Gary said that unlike A&R in the 80s music industry, which most likely included obtaining illegal substances and dates from the crowd for the band members, his job consisted mostly of taking teen Datamost programmers out for snacks and giving them quarters to play arcade games. Datamost also published a huge line of books for 80s 8-bit American machines. Gary said that their book publishing business for such titles as Atari Roots and Kids in the Atari was the most profitable side of the business. Gary described all kinds of profits, parties, and risque advertisements back in the 80s when Apple, Atari, and C64 games were flying off the shelves of all manner of retailers. The link to this very eye-opening interview is below. Like many publishers, Datamost had its share of fun arcade shooters, as well as quite a number of platform games. They also have a couple arcade puzzlers and at least one well-done classic board game. After replaying all of the Datamost titles, I have to admit that only a couple of them, Mr. Robot and His Robot Factory and The Tale of Beta Lyrae, really strike me as Atari 8-bit classics that I would have played back in the 80s. Although I'll add that Jetboot Jack, Cosmic Tunnels, and Roundabout have qualities that will keep me coming back for more now that I've played them. So as we see here, Datamost was really adamant in Christmas 1983 that both Atari and C64 owners would go out of their minds for their games, while in many cases classic reviewers didn't care that much for some of their games. As always, the truth lies somewhere in between. Up next are all 16 Atari 8-bit releases and some of my and the classic reviewers' thoughts on the games. Airstrike 1983, originally released in the UK, this is a very difficult Super Cobra style horizontal scrolling shooter by Stephen A. Riding, who also coded the Atari 8-bit classic Captain Sticky's Gold. Airstrike got generally good reviews in the USA, but Atari User in an oldies review only gave it 1.5 out of 4 in its issue 50, saying 8 years ago it was considered good, but today it's a little primitive. I will add that like many Datamost games, the controls get in the way of the gameplay. Airstrike is extremely difficult and the control far too touchy. Alternity 1983. This unique shooter is a cross between Amador and Tempest. Its controls take a bit to get used to, but is a blast to play. I could not find any contemporary reviews of Alternity, but it has a 7.4 out of 10 from Atarimania users. Ankh, 1984. A very interesting arcade puzzler that combines Berserk, Thrust, and Breakout into a puzzle game of discovery. The only reviews I found were for the C64 version, and it received an average of 80%, but a rather low 5.6 out of 10 from Atarimania users. Ardy the Aardvark, 1983. This Anteater arcade clone is quite well done and adds some unique elements not found in the arcade game. Although players seem to generally like this game, the only review for any system I could find was in page 6 Atari User issue 50, which gave it 2 out of 4, saying it's amusing at first, but its appeal dwindled after a few plays. Aztec, 1982. This almost forgotten classic was a must-have on the Apple II, and was ported quite well in Mode 8 to the Atari 8-bit computers with joystick control that leaves a little to be desired. Play slow and be careful. This is not the pure action title you're expecting. Although I remember this being a beloved classic on the Apple, I could not find any contemporary reviews for it or the Atari version. Atarimania users seemed to like it and gave it a solid 7.2 out of 10. I find this game far too difficult to have any fun with. Cohen's Towers, 1983. Like all Frank Cohen games, this one looks good and includes the music Datamost is very proud of, but it's very challenging to play. Contemporary reviews were all over the map on this one. Early page 6 issue 15 called it excellent, but after the Atari User page 6 merger, in a classic review it gave it only 2 out of 4, calling it only reasonably addictive. On the other hand, in Analog Magazine issue 20, notorious reviewer Steve Panic did not like it at all, calling it a crazy climber clone, which it certainly is not. Crazy Climber is a specific arcade game that is nothing like this. I guess to some people, any game where a building is involved is Crazy Climber. I'll give Steve Panic some credit though here. While it's not Crazy Climber, and while it looks and sounds pretty good, it's no fun at all. The difficulty is far too high. Cosmic Tunnels, 1983. A very cool shooter and action combo that is a close early cousin and possible inspiration for OIDs on the Atari ST, combined with Cosmic Arc on the VCS. Electronic Games magazine called Cosmic Tunnel excellent, but Analog issue 25, the same Steve Panic, called it insulting, while Atari User in issue 50 gave it a 2.5 out of 4. So it fared pretty well compared to other games we have seen them review so far in that issue 50 classic game roundup. Jet Boot Jack, 1984. Originally released by English Software, this is the official release of the John Williams classic in the USA. It's tough as nails, but John knew and still knows the Atari 8-bit graphics and sound inside and out. Page 6 magazine loved it early in issue 8, and also gave it 3 out of 4 stars later in issue 52, in a continuation of that classic game roundup, saying it's deserving of its minor classic status. Monster Smash, 1983. This is a combination of Whack-A-Mole, Mousetrap, and Zookeeper, where the player must stop monsters from escaping the screen. It includes music that some say rivals the Mule opening Poketune. Page 6, issue 15, called Monster Smash Simple but Addictive, which we wholeheartedly agree with. Mr. Robot and His Robot Factory, 1983. Along with its screen designer, we were always partial to this a little bit over Minor 2049er, but the level design was not quite as good as Bill Hoag's classic. Luckily, you can make your own. Electronic Fun, Page 6, Atari User, and the combined Atari User Page 6 all gave Mr. Robot high marks. Again, Analog Magazine gave the arcade game reviews to Steve Panic, who didn't really like arcade games on home computers. He said, "Try before you buy," which possibly is accurate if you were a hardcore Steve Panic review reader and agreed with him. If not, this is one of the better Atari 8-bit games to have ever been released. Mychess II, 1984. Developed as a rival to Sargon, this very well crafted chess game also has a set of classic games included for the player to study. I could not find any contemporary reviews for Mychess II across any platform, but I have to say that it looks great. I would like to have been able to use the joystick to move my pieces, but the coordinate entry system is probably more accurate and appropriate for hardcore chess players for which this is targeted. Atarimania users gave it a nice 7 out of 10. Nightraiders, 1983. This combo of Zaxxon and Bluemax, coded by a teenager, Peter Filiberti, is quite fun to play, with many various vertical scrolling challenging stages. Electronic Games magazine liked Nightraiders in its July 1984 issue, and Atarimania users seemed to appreciate its variety of gameplay, giving it 6.9 out of 10. Polar Pierre is a fun arcade-style non-scrolling platform game across multiple unique screens. I could not find any contemporary reviews of Polar Pierre, but it has a great 7.8 out of 10 rating on Atarimania. Roundabout, a fun and colorful sliding arcade shooter by Kent Simon, who also coded Ankh. This game is more appreciated by Atarimania users than Ankh is, with a very good, for Atarimania, 7 out of 10 rating. Super Bunny, 1984, a Mode 8 color game with artifacting that plays quite like Frogger. What we're showing here is a HomeSoft modded version that doesn't lock up the screen on my Atari 800XL or an emulation. Although there are no Atari 8-bit reviews from contemporary magazines, at least in my review database, I did find one Apple II review from Moby Games giving it 38% from Electronic Games magazine, while Atarimania users seem to like it a little bit more, with 6.7 out of 10. The Tale of Beta Lyrae, a 1983 fun Scrabble clone that Electronic Fun magazine called Tired in 1984, only giving it 2 out of 4. But Lyrae was universally lauded multiple times in both Page 6 and Atari User when they called it brilliant with excellent graphics and sound, while bestowing it ratings of 8 out of 10 and 3.5 out of 4. We wholeheartedly agree. Well, that's it for this time. Datamost was not as prolific as Synapse for the Atari 8-bit, and their games were a little more hit and miss. But I was generally pleased to play the ones I had not played and had fun revisiting my classic favorites in the vertical blank.
Program sound.